They say wedding planning brings out the worst in people, but I didn't expect it to bring out an affair. My wife wasn't the bride. She was the overly eager best friend who seemed more invested in the wedding than the bride herself. Looking back, I should have seen it coming when she started talking about the photographer like he was the second coming of Ansel Adams. Amanda, my wife's best friend, got engaged last spring. My wife, Sarah, was ecstatic. She volunteered to help Amanda plan everything, diving headfirst into spreadsheets, Pinterest boards, and vendor lists. I didn't think much of it. Sarah had always loved weddings, and Amanda's engagement was a big deal. It made sense she'd want to be involved. At first, it was harmless. Sarah and Amanda spent weekends touring venues, sampling cakes, and debating floral arrangements. But as the months went on, I noticed Sarah was dedicating an unusual amount of time to one specific part of the wedding: the photography. She kept bringing up the photographer Amanda had chosen, a guy named Jake. "Jake's work is incredible," she'd say. Or, "Amanda's so lucky to have found him." She even started following his social media accounts and showing me his posts over dinner. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't dwell on it. Sarah's always been detail-oriented, and I figured she just wanted Amanda's wedding to be perfect. But then things got weird. Sarah began attending meetings with Jake that Amanda wasn't even at, claiming Amanda had asked her to handle the details. She started dressing up more than usual for these meetings, wearing outfits I'd only ever seen her reserve for special occasions. When I joked that she was really going all out for this wedding, she just laughed it off. What struck me as even stranger was how secretive she became about her schedule. She started leaving the house at odd hours, saying she was meeting Amanda or handling last-minute tasks. When I asked about the specifics, her answers were always vague. "Oh, just something Amanda needed help with." But Amanda's name came up so often, it started to feel like an excuse rather than a reason. The turning point came when Sarah came home one evening, flushed and exhilarated, holding a set of sample photos. She showed them to me, gushing about how talented Jake was. The photos were beautiful, sure, but what stood out was how many of them featured Sarah herself. "Amanda wanted me to test out some angles for the bridal shoot," she explained. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I brushed it off at the time, telling myself I was overthinking things. After all, Sarah was just being a good friend. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder, why was she so invested in this photographer? At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Sarah had always been enthusiastic when it came to helping friends, and Amanda's wedding was no exception. But the way she talked about Jake lingered in the back of my mind. Every time his name came up, it wasn't just admiration, it was fascination. And when I noticed how often her errands seemed to involve him, the unease started to creep in. Sarah was gone more often than usual, always under the guise of helping Amanda. She claimed to be juggling everything from the seating chart to the flower arrangements, but it felt like Jake was always at the center of her plans. One day, she came home with a story about how she'd spent hours helping Jake scout a new outdoor location for Amanda's bridal shoot. "It's going to be magical," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Jake has such an eye for detail." I couldn't shake the feeling that her admiration was personal, not professional. The first real red flag came when Sarah's schedule started to overlap suspiciously with Jake's. She'd leave for a quick meeting with Amanda, but come home hours later, flushed and giddy, with vague explanations about running into Jake and brainstorming new ideas for the wedding. When I casually asked Amanda about these meetings during a chance encounter, her response was strange. "Oh, Sarah's been a lifesaver," she said. "But honestly, I haven't needed her as much lately. Things are mostly under control now." Under control? According to Sarah, Amanda needed constant help. The disconnect made my stomach turn. The second clue came when Sarah's phone buzzed one night while she was in the shower. I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Amanda or another friend. Instead, it was from Jake. The preview read, "Thanks for today, Sarah. Couldn't have done it without you." It wasn't incriminating on its own, but the casual tone felt off. Why was Jake thanking her for something I'd never heard about? And why didn't she mention spending time with him that day? The final straw came when I spotted something in Sarah's purse while she was getting ready for bed. A folded receipt from a local cafe caught my eye. Not for the coffee shop she and Amanda usually went to, but a small place I didn't recognize. The date matched the day she'd told me she was at Amanda's house. The receipt listed 2 lattes and a dessert. Nothing unusual, except for the handwritten note at the bottom. Always great to see you, Jake. My heart sank. This wasn't just about wedding planning anymore. There was something deeper going on, something Sarah wasn't telling me. But instead of confronting her, I decided to dig deeper. If Sarah was hiding something, I needed to know the full story before I acted. That night, while she slept, I started piecing together the fragments. Her sudden interest in wedding photography, her frequent absences, the cafe receipt, and Jake's casual texts. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start looking closer. The next day, while Sarah was out, I checked our shared calendar to see if her schedule lined up with Amanda's plans. It didn't. Most of the meetings Sarah claimed to have with Amanda weren't on the calendar at all. Instead, I noticed patterns, blocks of time where she was unaccounted for, often lining up with Jake's social media posts about location scouting or editing sessions. I couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. Sarah's dedication to Amanda's wedding wasn't about her best friend. It was about Jake. The realization hit me like a gut punch. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had proof that couldn't be dismissed. Once I started looking, it became impossible to stop. Every time Sarah left the house, every text notification on her phone, every mention of Jake felt like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. But the more I pieced together, the more I realized Sarah wasn't just helping with Amanda's wedding. She was building something else entirely, something she hadn't invited me into. The first step was subtle. I started keeping track of her comings and goings. I didn't confront her, or even ask too many questions. I just paid attention. Her wedding errands became increasingly frequent, and always seemed to fall on days Jake posted about working at his studio or scouting locations. It wasn't a smoking gun, but the timing felt too coincidental to ignore. Then came the wine. One evening, Sarah came home with a bottle of expensive red, smiling like she'd just stumbled upon the deal of the century. For Amanda's wedding shower, she said, placing it on the counter. But when Amanda stopped by later that week, I noticed the bottle wasn't among the items Sarah packed for the event. It was still sitting in our kitchen, unopened. A few days later, the bottle disappeared. I didn't think much of it until I saw Jake's Instagram post that evening. A photo of 2 glasses of red wine sitting on a cafe table, captioned, "A perfect way to wrap up the day." My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. It could have been anyone, but in my gut I knew. The tipping point came when Sarah's enthusiasm for the wedding shifted. She started talking about Jake's ideas more than Amanda's plans, as if the wedding itself had become secondary to whatever she and Jake were working on. One evening, she casually mentioned that Jake had offered to do test shots at a nearby park to perfect the lighting for Amanda's bridal shoot. Amanda said I should go to give feedback, she added, almost as an afterthought. I nodded, feigning interest, but my mind was racing. Amanda hadn't mentioned needing test shots the last time I spoke with her. And why would Jake need Sarah's feedback? She wasn't a photographer. The whole thing felt like a thinly veiled excuse. The next morning, while Sarah was in the shower, I checked her phone again. This time, I wasn't looking for texts, I went straight to her location history. Sure enough, the park Jake had mentioned was there, listed multiple times in the past few weeks. I scrolled further and saw other locations I didn't recognize, all repeating in a suspiciously regular pattern. The park wasn't the only place. There was also a small photography studio downtown, one Jake had posted about frequently. It was listed almost as often as the park, usually during the same blocks of time Sarah had claimed to be running errands for Amanda. I took screenshots of everything, my chest tightening with every new discovery. I needed more. If Sarah was meeting Jake, I wanted proof. Not just for myself, but so there would be no room for her to twist the truth. That afternoon, while she was out, I drove to the park she'd mentioned. It was quiet, almost deserted, but near the far edge, I spotted what I'd hoped I wouldn't. Jake's car, parked next to the small trail entrance. I waited, my heart pounding, until I saw them. Sarah and Jake were walking back toward the parking lot, deep in conversation. She was laughing, her hand brushing his arm, while he carried a camera bag slung casually over his shoulder. They didn't look like 2 people collaborating on a wedding shoot. They looked like 2 people who were comfortable in each other's company. Too comfortable. I didn't confront them. Not then. Instead, I took a photo from my car, capturing the moment they walked side by side, unaware of my presence. It was blurry, but clear enough to show who they were and how they interacted. It wasn't damning evidence, but it was a start. When Sarah came home that evening, she was glowing. The lighting was perfect, she said, dropping her bag by the door. Jake's so talented. He really knows how to make everything look magical. I nodded, playing along, but my mind was elsewhere. I had the beginnings of a plan. Sarah thought she was in control, that her secrets were safe. But I wasn't just collecting proof. I was building a case. And when the time came, I wouldn't just confront her. I'd make sure she couldn't talk her way out of it. She had spent months crafting a story she thought I'd never see through. What she didn't realize was that I'd already turned the lens back on her. I thought I had a clear picture of what was happening. Sarah's fixation on Jake, her mysterious absences, the cafe receipt, and her laughter in the park. It all felt like a web slowly weaving around me. But just as I was beginning to gather my evidence, something happened that threw the entire situation into a different light. It started with Amanda. I hadn't planned to involve her yet, but fate intervened. One evening, she called while Sarah was out, asking for help with her fiancé's surprise birthday party. She seemed distracted, and before I could even say yes, she blurted out something that caught me off guard. "Is Sarah doing okay?" "She's been different lately." Amanda's tone wasn't accusatory. It was concerned. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, not wanting to give away my growing suspicions. Amanda hesitated before continuing. "She's just been distant. She missed a few appointments she scheduled for the wedding, and she's been hard to reach. It's not like her." That was news to me. Sarah had made it seem like she was deeply involved in Amanda's wedding planning, attending every meeting and handling every little detail. Yet here was Amanda, saying Sarah hadn't even shown up. It didn't add up. When Sarah came home that night, I decided to test the waters. I casually mentioned Amanda's call, expecting Sarah to brush it off. But instead of her usual calm demeanor, I saw a flicker of something else. Guilt, maybe? She quickly recovered, saying Amanda was probably just stressed about the wedding and reading too much into things. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to visit Amanda myself, under the pretense of helping with her fiancé's party. As we worked on the decorations, I gently probed her about Sarah. Amanda's response left me speechless. "She's been spending a lot of time with Jake," Amanda said almost casually. At first, I thought it was sweet how invested she was in making sure the photos turned out great. But honestly, I started feeling like a third wheel in my own wedding. I froze. "What do you mean?" "Well," Amanda continued, "there have been a few times when Sarah showed up for meetings I didn't even know about. Jake mentioned she stopped by his studio once to help him prep, but I wasn't involved. I thought she was just being extra thorough, but I don't know. It felt weird." Weird was an understatement. This wasn't just Sarah going above and beyond for her best friend. She was inserting herself into Jake's life in ways that didn't involve Amanda at all. But the real twist came when Amanda mentioned the photo shoot. "Oh, and about the park shoot," she said, her tone shifting. "I saw some of the test shots Jake sent over. Sarah looked amazing in them." I nearly dropped the box I was holding. "Test shots?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, Jake sent me a few ideas for the bridal shoot," Amanda explained. I didn't think much of it, but it was a little odd that Sarah was in almost all of them. He said it was just to get a sense of the lighting and angles. This was something I hadn't considered. Jake had sent photos of Sarah to Amanda. It wasn't just about the secret meetings or the cafe receipt. There was a trail I hadn't even thought to explore. That evening, when Sarah went to bed, I logged into Amanda's shared wedding planning drive. She'd given me access months ago, asking for my opinion on caterers and music playlists. What I found, buried among contracts and spreadsheets, were folders of photo inspiration Jake had sent over. And there they were, pictures of Sarah in the park, posing like a model. In one, she was laughing with her head tilted back, the sun catching her hair. In another, she was sitting on the grass looking at something out of frame. They weren't inappropriate, but they were intimate in a way that didn't feel right. But that wasn't the twist. As I scrolled through the photos, I noticed something strange in one of them. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. A reflection in Jake's camera lens. At first, I thought it was just the park behind him, but then I realized it was a figure. Someone standing close, holding what looked like a small box. A gift box. It wasn't just Sarah and Jake in the park that day. Someone else had been there, someone I hadn't accounted for. The next morning, I returned to the park, retracing their steps as best as I could from the photos. Near the spot where one of the shots was taken, I found something surprising, a crumpled gift bag half hidden in the bushes. Inside was a small, empty jewelry box with a tag that read, "To Sarah from Jay." Jay. It didn't take a genius to figure out who that was. I stood there, holding the box, my mind racing. Who had given her this? Was it Jake? Or was it someone else entirely? The reflection in the photo hinted at a third person present during that shoot, someone Jake and Sarah had deliberately excluded from the story they were telling. This wasn't just an affair, it was a carefully curated secret. And now, I had to figure out just how many layers there were to it. After Amanda's revelation about Sarah's mysterious appearances at Jake's studio and the peculiar test shots, I knew it was time to accelerate my plan. But I also realized I didn't know the full scope of Sarah's deception. Who was the person reflected in Jake's camera lens? Why was she taking such calculated risks? I needed answers before I could act. The answers came sooner than I expected, delivered straight to me, wrapped in an unexpected twist. A few days after my conversation with Amanda, I received a package in the mail addressed to Sarah. It wasn't unusual for her to get deliveries, but the label caught my eye. It was from Jake's studio. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, careful to leave no trace. Inside was a framed photograph, a black and white portrait of Sarah. She was sitting on a wooden bench in the park, staring into the distance with a soft, almost wistful expression. It wasn't just a picture. It was intimate, raw, and far too personal for someone who wasn't supposed to be the subject. Alongside the photo was a handwritten note. For the muse who brings every shot to life. Jake. My pulse quickened. There was no ambiguity now. This wasn't just about wedding photography. Jake had crossed a line, and Sarah had allowed it, maybe even encouraged it. The note and the portrait confirmed what I had suspected all along. Sarah wasn't just involved in a professional relationship with Jake. She was part of something far more personal, something secret. But the real twist came when I turned the photo over. Scribbled on the back in Sarah's handwriting was a date and a time. This Friday at 3 p.m. My chest tightened as I realized what it meant. Sarah and Jake had another meeting planned, one she hadn't mentioned, one that had nothing to do with Amanda or the wedding. It was a chance encounter I wasn't about to let happen unnoticed. Instead of confronting Sarah, I decided to let her walk into her own trap. I reached out to Amanda and told her I wanted to help with her fiancé's surprise dinner. It gave me the perfect cover, an event Sarah wouldn't miss, where the truth could unfold in a way she couldn't talk her way out of. But I wasn't done preparing. I scanned the note, photographed the portrait, and added them to the growing pile of evidence. Then I started working on something new, a slideshow. Every receipt, every suspicious photo, every detail I'd uncovered went into a folder that would soon become the centerpiece of Sarah's undoing. Sarah thought she'd been clever, spinning her web of deceit while keeping me in the dark. But now I had the upper hand. She had set the date. I had set the stage. And when Friday came, it wouldn't just be a meeting with Jake. It would be the beginning of the end of her carefully constructed lie. The day of Amanda's fiancé's surprise dinner arrived, and with it, the perfect storm I had been building toward. Sarah was none the wiser. She spent the morning preparing, choosing an outfit that was far too glamorous for a simple dinner. She hummed as she got ready, blissfully unaware that I had orchestrated her undoing. We arrived at the venue together, her hand casually resting on my arm as if we were still the picture-perfect couple. I played along, smiling at guests and engaging in small talk, all while keeping an eye on the clock. The timing had to be perfect. As the dinner wrapped up and the room buzzed with laughter and congratulations, Amanda gave a heartfelt toast. It was warm and genuine, thanking everyone for their support. When she finished, I stood up, folder in hand, and cleared my throat. I'd like to say a few words as well. I began. Sarah's smile widened, clearly expecting a sentimental addition to Amanda's toast. Amanda has been working tirelessly on this wedding, with the help of her best friend, my wife, Sarah. And I think it's time we all see just how much effort Sarah has put in. The room quieted as I turned to the screen at the front of the room. With a click of the remote, the first image appeared, The portrait Jake had sent, Sarah sitting on the bench, her expression soft and unguarded. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by awkward silence. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is just one of the many test shots Jake took with Sarah. They aren't for Amanda's wedding, though. These are part of a private portfolio, a collaboration my wife forgot to mention." Sarah's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. The next slide appeared. Jake's handwritten note, scanned and projected for everyone to see. "For the muse who brings every shot to life. Jake." The murmurs began, guests exchanging shocked looks, but I wasn't done. I clicked again, showing a series of photos. Receipts from their coffee shop meetings, an image of Sarah laughing with Jake in the park, and the infamous gift bag with "To Sarah from Jay" written on the tag. Each slide was a dagger, cutting through the illusion Sarah had worked so hard to maintain. "I've spent months wondering why Sarah was so invested in Amanda's wedding," I said, turning to face her. "Now I know. It had nothing to do with Amanda and everything to do with Jake." Sarah tried to stand, her voice trembling as she muttered something incoherent, but Amanda was quicker. She rose, her face red with anger, and glared at Sarah. "You were supposed to be helping me, not this," Amanda said, gesturing toward the screen. Jake, who had been invited to the dinner as the photographer, was suddenly the center of attention. Amanda's fiancé rounded on him, demanding explanations, while Jake stumbled over his words, trying to deny any wrongdoing. The room erupted into chaos, guests whispering, others glaring at Sarah and Jake. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. My part was done. I left the folder on the table, along with divorce papers I had prepared earlier that week. By the time Sarah returned home that evening, I was gone. The house empty of everything but her belongings and a note that read, "Your lies caught up with you. Don't bother running." Sarah had spent months crafting a story where she was the heroine, the selfless best friend, the devoted wife. But in the end, her lies had unraveled, leaving her exposed and alone. I wasn't just free of her betrayal. I was free of her entirely. The truth had won, and so had I.